Hey everyone, my name is Omar Khateeb and welcome back to the State of MedTech. We are live from LSI USA 2024. I'm so excited because I'm joined by somebody who has a remarkable story, but more importantly, a very well-respected name in the industry and one of the nicest men that I know, Manny Villafaña. Manny, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Pleasure, Omar.
You know, I appreciate it because earlier you were telling me that you're going to bring out the best in me, and you're bringing out the best in me today. But the good news is that I get to ask the questions.
We're getting it done. Okay.
So, you know, Manny, a lot of people in our industry know of you, know your story. But I want to start from the beginning. Who is Manny Villafaña?
Okay, well then I think we have to start in the South Bronx. I was born and raised in the South Bronx in an area called Mount Haven. And what's interesting is that the New York Times, which is probably the most prominent newspaper of the world, on the front page of the New York Times, they did a story about my street, where I was born and raised, which was East 139th Street. And the story dealt with the fact that the neighborhood was the poorest congressional district of our country, was filled with crime, prostitution, drugs, whatever have it. And they named the story Life at the Bottom. Now, what did that mean for me? Well, it happens that there was, in my family, zero education. My father, who was born in Puerto Rico, my mother was born in Puerto Rico, had no education. My father did not know how to read or write and would sign with the proverbial X. My mother had a third grade Spanish education, a little bit about reading, but it was in Spanish, so that was no help to me. I had three brothers, all of whom did not even graduate from grammar school, because there was a very high prevalence of alcohol in our family. They were alcoholics before they even were old enough to graduate from grammar school. They left, all of them left, that is to say, my father and my three brothers were gone from the family by the time I was 7 years old. And so it was just Mom and I doing our thing in the South Bronx. My mother was a seamstress and tried to make a little bit of pennies. I had no money. But fortunately, I had a neighborhood boy across the street that introduced me to a boys' club, Kips Bay Boys Club. And I asked him, where do you go on Saturdays? And he says, well, we go down to a boys' club. And he introduced me, and I started to be at that club a lot, because it takes the kid off the street, away from the drugs, away from the crimes, away from the gangs, okay? And fortunately, through them, I had a few opportunities. The first opportunity was that at the age of 9, I was working full-time, 7 hours a day, hanging up coats for kids and taking care of the gym equipment and stuff like that. That was my first job at 40 cents an hour. Later on, through them, I met someone who was able to get me even a better job. And as a result, I ended up working, of all things, working in a company that was making equipment for the ballistic early warning systems during the Cold War. But I had a little bit of education. Next door was a Catholic parish school, a grammar school called St. Luke's School. Graduated from there and then went to Cardinal Hayes High School, which is still, in my opinion, probably the best high school in the country. I was able to get a decent education there, very proud of it, but never had a chance to go to college because there was no such thing as education system to, funding for colleges and stuff like that. So I never had the chance to go to college. I worked my way through, I learn, I read, and I'm self-educated on various things. As I went forward, I finally ended up working at a company called Picker X-Ray, which had an international division called Picker International, in which we acted as an export agent for small developing medical companies. And one of those small medical companies was a teeny weeny company that had no profits, less than $1 million in sales, and that company was called Medtronic. And Medtronic was noted for developing implantable pacemakers. Pacemakers that were put in your body to stimulate the heart in case your heart rate was going too low. I worked for Picker. Finally, one day, the president of Medtronic and the vice president of sales for Medtronic came out to New York to hire me, to pull me out of Picker and to come work directly for Medtronic, which I did in 1967. It's interesting that when I arrived in Minneapolis with the headquarters of Medtronic on March 8th, 1967, the temperature was 15 below zero with a wind chill of 43 below zero. And I said to myself, where did I go wrong, dear Lord, that I'm here on this day? Anyway, so that's my early beginning as far as how did I get into the medical device industry.
It's amazing. And it's amazing also to hear that, Medtronic, who's, I think, as of today, their market cap's like, I think, $125 billion, at some point was making less than $1 million, almost bankrupt.
Yeah.
In your career, there's a point where Manny goes from an employee to becoming an entrepreneur. What made you do that?
Well, during my early years at Medtronic, I convinced them that we should open up a facility in South America, because South America, Latin America, was really the biggest market for pacemakers. What are you talking about, Manny? They have no money. What are you talking about? I said, well, it turns out that there is a bug, believe it looks like a little cockroach, that causes a disease in children called Chagas disease, which manifests itself by young men and women falling down around the age of 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, falling down because they developed heart block. And the heart block started when they were little babies, and a bug that looked like a cockroach would bite them on the cheek and on the eyelids, and cause a parasite to go into the body, which would then bore a hole in the myocardium of the heart and disturb the conduction system of the heart and cause heart block. But it didn't manifest itself until another 15, 20 years after the child was bitten. So the child was never treated. There was nothing to be done until the child manifested the heart block by, boom, the heart rate going so far down that they fall on the floor, go unconscious, and sometimes even die. And no one in the USA knew about this thing. And so when I started to talk about it at Medtronic, Manny, you're crazy. I said, no, I've been told I've been crazy a lot of times, but not this time. Chagas disease was very prevalent. I convinced him, and I opened up a facility for Medtronic in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Now, during that time, Medtronic was making pacemakers. They were big and bulky, about the size of a hockey puck, and it would then, but they would last only about 12 to 18 months. At that time, pacing was so new that I was actually going into the OR, into the operating room, and teaching doctors how to implant this, how to take a catheter, put it down a vessel, or maybe sewing onto the epicardium of the heart a lead so that you can pace. I was in the OR teaching all the time. But they were failing all the time too, so much so that At times, we were having actual pacemakers fail before we even put them into the body. It was pretty bad. So as a result, after my tenure down in South America for 2 years, when I came back, I said to the people at Medtronic, we got to do something about it. We got to make a better pacemaker. Simultaneously, there was a gentleman who had invented the very first successful implantable pacemaker, a guy named Bill Greatbatch, who we ran into each other, we knew each other, and he started talking about some work that he was doing on a new power supply called lithium power. And we know lithium today to operate cars and things like that, and flashlights and all that. But at that time, there was nothing. It was just lithium. It was a high-density battery, et cetera, et cetera. I said, what are you going to do with it? He says, well, I'm going to, tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with Medtronic to see if I can get them to change from the old mercury zinc batteries to a lithium battery. I said, okay, fine. And he went his way and I went my way. In the meantime, a couple of months later, I was meeting with some people and they said, what would you do to compete against Medtronic? I said, well, I would go and make a lithium pacemaker, blah, 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 et cetera. And in fact, the idea was so good that I went back to Bill and I said, Bill, whatever happened to that idea? He said, I went to Medtronic and they said it can't be done. And I said to him, do you believe it can be done? He says, yes. So I said to him, and I'm leaving out a few chapters of the story, I said to him, here's the deal. If you promise never to make a pacemaker, I promise never to make a battery. Not that I knew how to make a battery, but I said that to him. And I will be your first customer, and you will be my first supplier. Without any paperwork, without any lawyers or anything, we shook hands. He left to start a company called Wilson Greatbatch Limited, which is a multi-billion-dollar company making batteries. And I went off and started a little pacemaker company called CPI, which stood for Cardiac Pacemakers, Inc. CPI became CPI Guide and eventually was bought out by Boston Scientific for $27.2 billion. And that's how we started pacemakers, okay? I was sued by Medtronic, but we eventually won that handsomely. And so that's how I got started in making a product.
Not a bad first company. Not a bad one.
Yeah.
I got to ask you, hearing your story about how you grew up and the difficulties you went through, why is it you ended up where you were at Medtronic and starting CPI versus any other route? What made you take a different route?
Well, if you follow my career, I always go the opposite direction. Because going down the same direction as everybody else is going to end up at the same destination as everybody else, which is usually a failure or usually something that is so-so, okay? When we started CPI, there were 7 manufacturers of pacemakers. All were making the same basic pacemaker, the same power source, having the same results of about 12 to 18 months, okay? You had to go do totally something different. In fact, at one point, Bill Greatbatch calls me up and says, you know, Manny, I think you should first make a standard mercury pacemaker, because I don't know if I can supply the battery that I thought I could supply you. And I said, Bill, everybody's going that direction. I am not going to go to that direction, waste time. How am I going to compete against 7 other manufacturers without something other than the name of the company, okay? So we stuck and we worked it out with the lithium, even though his reduced battery capacity was still good enough to power one of our pacemakers for 50 years, 50, okay? And I just do those things that way. When we started our next company, which was St. Jude, I don't know if you want to go into that right now, but when we started St. Jude, again, every single doctor was begging us, well, you got to make a better valve. All valves were failing terribly. And they were made out of rubber or metal, plastic. Some forms of just the introduction of some pyrolytic carbon, but they all would fail tremendously. And we said, we're going a different way. We're not going to use rubber. We're not going to use metal. We're going to make a valve out of glass. What are you, crazy, Manny? Yeah, glass. What happens if I hit it accidentally? It breaks. Really? Yeah, you can break it with your pinky. You can break it with your needle. If you scratch it with a needle, you can't implant it because it would cause a thrombus formation there. It was really, really difficult, to the point that there was actually an article written in a medical journal that said, open quotation marks, "It will never work," exclamation point, close quotation marks, dash the St. Jude valve. That's a medically written paper saying, it ain't gonna work. But we got it to work, and it became the most commonly used prosthesis of the world, the standard of the world. And eventually that company was sold for $30 billion. In today's dollars, another $50 billion.
Not bad.
Not bad.
Not bad.
Not bad.
Why, after your first success, which was CPI and Guided,
Yeah.
having such a success like that, most people decide to sort of sit back on their laurels, enjoy it.
Oh.
What about it made you say, I'm ready to do the next thing?
No, you don't do that. People think that okay, we've done that, now what are we going to do? It doesn't really happen that way. But it does happen that when you're doing something, and I'm the kind of guy, I don't get my jollies watching a company go from 100 employees to 500 employees to 5,000 employees and watching that grow. That doesn't turn me on. What turns me on is there's a challenge. Can we solve that challenge? Can we finance it properly? Can we make it grow? Can we put a team and do it? And now once it's doing it up and running, I'm finished. I leave, okay, and go on to another challenge, okay. When we were doing CPI, two doctors came to me and said, "Manny, you know how bad valves are," and I knew nothing about heart valves. And they told me, in fact, one had a little metal prototype that he got me interested in it. And he said, "Manny, why don't you make a valve?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, yeah, here's a little prototype. Maybe we can make a valve at CPI." We were pretty busy at CPI. In fact, when I talked to the guys and said that one of our doctors, Dr. Nikoloff, wants us to make a heart valve, that one of the guys just turned around and said, "What, are you kidding me? We are so busy. We are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The lights never go out. We don't even have enough time to go to the bathroom." So I said, "Well, guys, I've done my thing here. Okay, you guys can run the company," and which you did. It went to the moon and bounced off the moon and went to Mars, okay. But I'm going to try this. I didn't know anything about heart valves, so the doctor, Dr. Nikoloff, went to his own personal library, took a book off the shelf, and it says, "From the library of Dr. Nikoloff," and he gave me the book. It's signed and everything. He gave me the book. He said, "Read." And the name of the book was Heart Valves, a whole thick volume on the work that had been done on heart valves. I brought in a couple of guys that I knew, and we went and bought 2 more of those books, and the 3 of us just sat down and looked on how we're going to try to solve this problem. We brought in not an engineer, but we brought in a gadgeteer, for lack of a better word, who was a gadgeteer working on cars, antique cars. I had antique cars as well too, so we had a little fun. And together, we solved the problem by totally different way of making a heart valve. In fact, he got the idea from a carburetor in a car, one of the cars, and it worked. And we pursued it. We chose to go with an exotic material at that time called pyrolytic carbon, which is a form of glass. And we worked, and we put it in animals, and it was working fine. And at the very, very first human implant, which was the 3rd of October of 1977, There's Dr. Nikoloff implanting it into a lady, Helen Heinkinen, 75-year-old woman. And she lived 11 years with that valve. She died of cancer. And that valve, that was the beginning. And it took off like unbelievable, okay? Financially, that project was probably one of the most successful financial projects that Wall Street has ever seen. Case in point, if you took $1 million and you put it on the IPO of a little company called Tesla, okay, and you held that stock until it reached a high, you would have a return of $450 million on your $1 million investment. And you would be dancing all day long. Twice on Sunday you're going dancing, because that's a hell of a return. But if you did the same thing when we did St. Jude, and you put $1 million on the IPO of St. Jude, and you held it only for the time that you've held your Tesla, you would have between 1.2 and 2.0 billion dollars. So we're talking about a company who's outperformed Tesla by 6 or 7 times. Think about that. Not bad.
Not bad at all.
That's why when I say, when you come to our booth and we start saying, we're doing another St. Jude, because what we're doing is creating a new product, which I have all the same major steps, except the first step. When we did St. Jude, the first step was we decided to do a heart valve. The first step at Medical 21 is we're trying to do an artificial graft, okay? That's the only difference. But you still have to form a team. You still have to finance it. You still have to build facilities. You still have to do your research and development, your animal work, your clinical trials, and all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we find that many of our doctors are the same doctors. The doctors who praise us for doing the St. Jude valve and doing the ATS valve later on are the same doctors that are saying, Manny, when can we get this graft? So that's what we're doing.
That's fantastic. You shared a lot of amazing success stories, and it's one after the other. I'm wondering, during that time, there were times that you probably went through some very difficult times. You had to make very difficult decisions. I want to go, back to CPI, because that was your very first company, being a young CEO, young entrepreneur. What were some of the more difficult decisions that you had to make, and how did that change you?
I know it's hard to imagine this, but CPI was a cakewalk. Okay?
Really?
Oh yeah. If you think about this will blow you away. We opened the doors on the 2nd of February 1972. We had the first human implant, okay, put into a human being on November 29th of the same year. That's
within the same
9.5
year.
months.
That's unheard of.
Oh, right, of course, unheard of, okay? Everything went very, very well. And our biggest challenge probably was the fact that we were doing this while Medtronic was suing us, claiming that we had taken something, which later on we showed them that we had done nothing, okay? But that was the only real challenge, but we kept doing it. We were able to raise capital. Actually, it became very easy when Medtronic sued us, because they said, well, Manny, we thought you had something. Now that Medtronic is suing you, we know you got something. So that helped.
They validated it for you.
Validated it, okay? That also was a home run financially. In fact, even better than St. Jude, if you can imagine that. Okay, the return to an investor at CPI was even better than the story I told you about St. Jude.
So everything was good. So you said it was a cakewalk.
Yeah, it was.
Do you feel that because of that, because this is your first try, it was so easy and everything, that momentum and confidence carried over into St. Jude, even though you were tackling a very difficult issue, things that people wrote, they said it can never be done. It just kind of, went off you like sort of water on a duck's back, and you said...
Well, there was a little hidden agenda in my head.
What was that?
which I've never discussed before. This is the first time.
I told you you're going to bring out the best of me.
Right,
Right?
there you go. All right, and there's a little hidden secret. When when I started St. Jude, there was within me a little hidden thing. I wanted to do it again, to prove that I could do it again. You know, you did CPI. Was it because of you? Was it because of anything else? Was it because of this or that? You never really had a degree of confidence. But let's go and do St. Jude, where we had nothing staring us in the face, no new ideas, and you just had to study valves and see how bad they were and create something around that. And that's what we did with the St. Jude valve. And there, again, we opened the doors on the 4th of July, 1976, okay? And we did our first human implant on the 3rd of October of 1977, so about 15 months later. Again, a very fast track record. But we did it, and in fact, during the processing of everything, somebody used the word legend, and Manny Villafaña, legend. And we all started to laugh because I'd never seen that. And it was in an actual document. Obviously, it was in the proof. You know, one of my lawyer friends was saying, and Manny, the legend, wrote that down. And we kind of laughed and everything. And of course, in the final document, the word legend was not in there because it was a serious document. It was the prospectus, okay?
Got it.
Okay. But we kid around. But after that time, everybody used that word legend. And in fact, at one point, the World Society of Cardiothoracic Surgeons gave me the Living Legend of Medicine Award.
That's amazing. What year was that?
2006.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the hidden secret is that you wanted to do it again. You wanted to do that. Was it because you were trying to prove something? Why did you feel like you wanted to do it again? What was driving that?
Hey, look, if you did something and you hit a home run, right? You got up at the bat and you swung the bat, and it happened to be the first pitch, and it went out of here, right? Wouldn't you want to try to do that again?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I told you I'm going to bring the best out on you, okay? Of course you want to do it again. You don't want anybody, well, I was lucky. He was lucky, you know. I wanted to do it again, and I did do it again, okay? All right? And this one was even more recognized than the first one.
Why?
Because it was much harder. No one, there had been at that time at least 50 valves that had been tried. There was at least 6 or 7 major manufacturers of valves, all struggling, trying to make them. They would clog up. Tissue valves would fail at 5 years. I even remember going to Mass General Hospital and talking to the chief of cardiac surgery and saying to him right in his room, "You are practicing bad medicine," because they were implanting tissue valves at that time. And he got up, and there were several doctors there. He got up, grabbed me by the arm. He said, "Let me walk you out." Not only did he walk me out of the room, he walked down a long, long hallway at Mass General Hospital, you know, where all the patients are walking back and forth, long, long hallway to the front door. And the front door of Mass General is at the top of a long staircase. And he walked me right outside, and I thought for sure he was going to push me down those stairs. He didn't, of course. And but the moral of the story was that about a year later, he was implanting the St. Jude valve.
It's amazing. During those years that St. Jude was started, cardiac surgery, I feel that was one of the most exciting areas. You had DeBakey Cooley battling it out. And I mean, it was so famous that even I think Life or Time magazine had a cover story on it, you know?
Yeah, sure.
2 surgeons battling at the heart. Right? What was it like to be pioneering such a difficult area and dealing with probably the most, let's just be frank, difficult surgeons, because these were people who were doing the most difficult type of surgeries at the time, pioneering, and of course you're dealing with a lot of big egos. How did you manage that? How important was it to find the right surgeons who got the vision?
Well, it's interesting. you will always hear stories about Dr. So-and-so competing with Dr. So-and-so. You always have that. Those are personalities, okay? It'd be like you and me, okay? You're good looking, I'm better looking, okay? It'd be something like that. But at the end of the day, both of them want to do the best that they know how to do for their patients. I have the greatest respect of, for example, those two gentlemen, DeBakey and Denton Cooley, okay? You know, and we became friends. I knew them personally and things like that. But they all wanted to do the best, okay? There was another doctor and that's a guy named Christian Barnard, who did the first heart transplant, okay? And he wrote a book called Second Life. And there's a whole chapter in that book devoted on his effort to try to make a heart valve. At the last sentence of that chapter says, the hardest thing a man can do is to try to create a heart valve.
Why is that? What makes a heart valve so difficult?
It's so hard. You put anything in the body wants to reject it, wants to dissolve it, wants to beat it up, and you've got to try something to say, no, move over. We're going to take out that organ that keeps you alive, namely your heart valve. We're going to throw it away. And we're going to put in this artificial thing, okay? And it's going to have to take 40 million beats per year. It has to go tremendous pressure. During your normal lifetime, it's going to open and close several billion times. How do you do that?
And make sure it doesn't change.
Yeah, and it doesn't change. So it was very difficult. However, when we approached them and they saw the benefit, they became our biggest proponent. A perfect example was, I was walking down the hallway in this meeting, this medical congress, with Dr. Chris Maloney out of Tucson, Arizona. And we were in, I believe, Phoenix at the time. And we had just started doing a few implants, and he was one of the original guys doing the implant, and he saw immediately, before you get out of the OR, you see the difference with a good valve versus the old bad valves. And so we're walking down the hallway. He's done maybe 10, 15 valves. We have in a whole world maybe a couple of hundred valves, maybe 300 valves in the whole world. And we're walking down the hallway, and another doctor comes our direction, and he says to the doctor, hey, I want you to introduce you to Manny Villafaña. He's the guy that's done the St. Jude valve. And the doctor says, yeah, I heard about it. How many do you have in? And Chris Maloney said, yeah, between 2,000 and 3,000 implants. And I'm going to look that up. Have your guy come and talk to me. Okay, fine. And we're continuing walking down the hall, down the aisle there. And I said to Chris, we don't have that. I mean, we have maybe 200, 300 valves implanted. He says, that's what I said, between 2,000 and 3,000. Okay? The guys would help me. They really, really would. I mean, I had a meeting at a temperature of 35 below zero in a little dinky motel, and doctors came from all over the world to listen to the very first things of what we were doing with the St. Jude valve. Okay? And they would get up and, I'll help you do that. I'll help you improve that. For example, we never had a single mitral valve implanted. We only had aortic valves implanted, because those were a little bit easier than the mitral. And one doctor would say, well, what's your results with the mitral position? Oh, we haven't done that yet. Why? Well, we're just kind of going a little bit slow to see how things are going with the aortic. He said, I'll do that study for you. I'll do my next 35 valves with your valve in the mitral position. He did. He did it. No ands, ifs, or buts about it. And about a year later, he reported on his 35, and they were all fine and good. But they were helping us do it. They needed that valve. And a lot of people helped us with the St. Jude valve. And again, it was a case that we were having difficulty making enough of them. Wow. Now, a funny thing that happened, we did our first human implant on the 3rd of October, 1977. However, this valve that's made out of pyrolytic carbon, which is a compressed glass, was very fragile to handle. And when we started to make the valve, they would break. Okay? So October 3rd, 1977. So in October, November, December, January, and February, in those 5 months, we could not make the valve enough of them because they would break. In the month of February of 1978, we made 100 rings, but when we tried to put the leaflets into the valve, 97 out of 100 rings broke. So I'm laying in bed in March, almost crying because we know we're going to have to close down the company. We can't make the product. We've tried everything. My engineers are going crazy. And it's snowing to beat the band. This is Minnesota in March. Phone rings at 3 o'clock in the morning. Ring, ring. Hello? Manny, it's Peter. Peter, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, I know, but I just had a dream. I know how to solve the problem. This is one of my engineers that have been saying to me, yeah, we're going to solve this problem. Don't worry about it, man. We'll solve it. And here we are, 5 months later, unable to make just a few valves, and we needed thousands of valves, okay? And I said, Peter, it's snowing, it's cold, go back to bed. And he said, no, Manny, I'll meet you at the office at 5 o'clock. And I said, you'll be lucky if I'm there at 9 o'clock. There's a big snowstorm. I said, all right, so we hang up the phone. Sure enough, 9 o'clock comes, I pull in, it's snowing, and he's at the door, takes my jacket off and hangs it up for me. He says, come on, we're going into the lab. So we go into the lab, and there on the lab, there are 13 rings to make the valves. He said, sit down. I said, wait a minute, I'm the president of the company. I don't think I'm going to be making valves for the rest of my life, okay? All right? He said, no, I want you to do it. I said, why don't you grab one of our production gals? You know, they have these glasses so that when the valve breaks, it doesn't hit their eyes. And, you know, oh, no. There's no glasses, nothing. We're going to do it. And I said, why am I going to do it? He said, well, I figured if a Puerto Rican kid could do it, anybody can do it. So after I kicked him in a few places, I sit down, and I proceeded to make 13 valves. All of them worked. And at which time I said, come over here. So tell me what the dream, and he told me what happened. And I said, okay, we're going to make a special room with only a manufacturing young lady with the small hands that will do this, and a supervisor. And we're never going to patent that procedure. We'll keep it as a trade secret. And we never patent how to be able to get the ring so that we can stick in the leaflets and stuff like that. And that was the end. And from then on, we went to the moon.
What was the dream, though?
No, I can't tell you that.
Oh, you can't tell us that?
No, I would have to cut your tongue and do a few other things to you.
Okay, so we'll move on away from the and St. Jude ended up exiting for about a little north of $30 billion to...
Right, $30 billion to Abbott.
Fantastic.
And today's dollars, 45 to 50 billion.
Got it.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people are in those kind of rooms that you end up negotiating a deal like that. What's that process like? Because you've done it multiple times in your career. When you're negotiating with a strategic, what is that like? What are some advice you'd give to entrepreneurs?
First and foremost is that when you build a company, surround yourself with the very best that you can get. Okay. Sitting here is Chade, okay, all right? You'll have to ask him, okay? When somebody comes along and tries to buy Medical 21, which I'm sure it will be, I may be already fishing or not playing golf, but doing some other things, and he will bring in his talents to negotiate that. I was calling in a couple of them just to ask him, what do you think about the company and all that, because we want to buy it and stuff like that. And I basically will tell them what I think. Okay, but it's nothing different than you going to buy a car. You're going to negotiate, and being Puerto Rican, but just living with your mom taught you how to negotiate. Okay, and there's other stories, but again, we don't have that much time, okay? And it's just something that you do, and there's nothing a secret to it. I mean, right now, we talk to our potential investors that unlike other companies where they will wait for you to have 30, $50 million in sales before they will approach you, I sincerely feel that on this company, Medical 21, strategics will approach us earlier. Why? Because it's such a big market. We're working on a product right now which is the single biggest product ever developed to be implanted in a human body. And all the key players, the Medtronics of the world, the St. Jude, the Bostons, the Edwards, all these kinds of companies, this would fit into them, and this would be bigger than their top 3 products combined. A Medtronic, for example, makes pacemakers, they make heart valves, they make stents, they make defibrillators, all that, right? Take that all, put it all together, and this product is bigger than that, okay? So, you mean to tell me they're going to just wait around till we hit $30 to $50 million when 3 other companies are looking at that same thing? No, I think somebody's going to come in a little bit earlier than normal. That's just my thinking. I can't guarantee.
And this is with the artificial graft, correct?
We're making an artificial graft.
Do you feel that this is in some ways similar to the challenges that you faced at St. Jude's, which is doing an artificial valve? Never been done, very difficult to do, right? Do you feel like it's somehow similar to that?
Oh, very similar to that.
But a much larger market.
Yeah, much larger.
Because not everybody gets a valve these days, but
yeah,
grafts.
Right,
I mean,
my
father had one. I mean, a lot of people.
Yeah. When we started St. Jude, the world market for heart valves was 65,000 valves per year of all kinds of valves, tissue and mechanical. Okay, this project. The market is about 2.5 to 3.5 million grafts per year. So we're talking about a market 50 times larger, okay? Now, the degree of difficulty of making it, okay, again, is we started with new materials doing St. Jude, and on this graft we're trying new materials, and it's been very challenging. Now, we've been at this for 7 years. We put 7 years of work. We have done a lot of animals. Okay, and it's just now that when we are ready to go into humans, and part of the reason that we're here at the LSI meeting is that we're meeting with potential investors as we're trying to do a raise of about $10 million to do the clinical trial in Switzerland to get started. Okay, we're doing that right now. Okay, is it difficult? They've both been very difficult, okay? Now, in the same way, 40, 50, 100 different companies are trying to make a better valve. The same thing here. People for the last 60 years, maybe 50, 100, at least 100 companies have tried to make a product that would work, and no one has ever been able to do that. The same degree of difficulty, but the market is, like I said, at least 50 times larger, and there are no competitors, okay? I mean, there are 3 or 4 companies trying to do, okay, but is there anybody walking around with a graft? No. Okay.
I want to, before we jump into Medical 21, I do have to ask one question. You know, aside from CPI, St. Jude, there's a handful of other companies you had started successfully that we haven't mentioned. When you kind of look back at your career, the success is all there, right? And it leaves a lot of clues. I'm also wondering, what were some of the more painful and difficult lessons that you learned? Because, you know, when you go into Medical 21, you're taking all of that experience, all those lessons, and tackling a very difficult problem with a massive market.
Yeah.
So if you look back in your history, is there certain moments, you know, whether it's mentors or people you work with, that, you know, you learned a very painful lesson that changed you, changed the way you act as a leader, changed the way you operate as an entrepreneur? Does anything stand out?
Okay, let's go back to the beginning of time, okay? All right, in the book of Genesis, okay? When you go back to cardiac surgery, there was a gentleman that came up with an idea. His name was Professor C. Walton Lillahei. He was going to do the first open heart surgery, and he had this idea, and he spoke to his group, And he, of course, went to his boss and said, this is what I would like to do, and this is the animal work I've done, and et cetera, et cetera. And the boss said, by all means, go ahead. It's written on a little piece of paper, which is in a museum. You can read this little piece of paper. It says, Walt, by all means, go ahead. Okay? He described what he was going to do to a group of surgeons, of which one surgeon got up, left, and went to see the judge, and looked to get a warrant for his arrest. And he went to the judge, and he said, "Oh, this crazy guy wants to do this thing, which doesn't have a 100% chance of mortality. It has a 200% chance of mortality." Of course, the judge says, "How does that happen?" And he begins to describe what C. Walton wants to do. Now, mind you, no one has done this. Okay? All right? And so he proceeded to do an operation in which, in reality, we don't have time to describe the entire operation, but in reality, if something went wrong, the child, which was a baby, would die, and the parent would die. Okay? So that's a 200% chance of mortality. Now, history, it went well, and that was the beginning. But in the meeting with him, talking to him, he described what I now call the creed of the entrepreneur, and that is this: the greatest hazard in life is an individual who does not want to take risk. Because if you don't take risk, nothing will happen, you'll do nothing, and you are nothing. And that is the creed. And in fact, when I give lectures on entrepreneurship, that's my last slide that I throw up on the screen. So everybody leaves that room knowing, hey, if you want to play this game, you better be able to take risks. Do not be one that's risk averse. Risk averse is for something else, not to put your family, your life, your income, your everything on the line. You know, one of the greatest things I always talk about entrepreneurs is the guy comes home and he says to his wife, or the wife comes home and says to the spouse, whatever, but the entrepreneur says, I am going to do this. I'm going to conquer the world. I got this great idea. I'm going to conquer the world. I'm leaving my job. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Comes home and the wife says, you're doing what? Yeah, I'm going to do all this and this. He says, you realize the company's going to stop paying you. You're not an employee anymore, okay? And I'm sorry, who's going to pay the mortgage? Who's going to put food on the table? Who's going to educate our children? And by the way, I forgot to tell you, I'm pregnant, okay? That is the first step that you have to encounter when you think that you want to conquer the world and be an entrepreneur, etc. Okay? Another slide that I show is basically a slide in which I ask the audience, guys, I want you to open up your shirts. And gals, open up your blouses. First of all, I get a lot of attention when I say that.
It's a good line.
Right? Good line, right? And what I do is I throw a slide on the screen, and there's a guy opening up his shirt, and it has a big red S. Okay? And I said, now, take a look. If you don't have a red S, forget about becoming an entrepreneur in the medical device area. Why? Because unlike other industries where you first go and you develop the greatest things in sliced bread, okay, but now you get started because now you didn't have the regulatory aspects of this. You got to be a Superman to be able to do all of this. You got to be a superwoman. You got to have the red S, okay? And those are all the things, you know, when they say, well, what do you think about this? Or how do you think about it? No, but this is a different ball game. This is a totally different ball game, and starts with taking risks. Well, what are you going to do when you get down there? I don't know. We'll work on it when we get down there. Okay, there's no answers. Okay, we learned, Chade and the group, working on this graph, and we try it. And I remember having dinner with him after we had done the first animal, and it was working. We were smiling that went from ear to ear to ear and all the way to the back. We were smiling. But within 24 hours, that animal died. Okay? And so that was iteration number one. Put it aside. And we tried another thing. Fail. And another one. Fail. You know, and they failed maybe 30 days, 10 days, a variety of different things. When we got to iteration number 11, all of my guys were kind of looking at me, kind of cross-eyed, and said, Manny, this ain't looking good. Manny, what are we going to do? That kind of stuff. And I turned around to them and I said, I want to tell you a little story when we were doing St. Jude. One day, going to St. Jude, I happened to go back to the machine shop. Now, mind you, you're working with hard material, so you're always working in the machine shop, cutting it and all that sort of stuff. And there was a guy named Charlie Hosley, who was my machinist. And he was adjusting the machines, okay? But he was crying. Tears were coming down his cheeks. I said, Charlie, what's wrong? And he said, Manny, this is the 26th adjusting of this machine. It says 26 iterations of the St. Jude valve, and it's still not working. 26. Well, of course, that story ended in maybe the 27th, 28th, 29th, I don't remember, iteration finally working. But when I'm telling the story to my guys, they're at 11, got a way to go yet, guys. And sure enough, around iteration number 13, we thought we had it. In fact, we had a meeting with our advisors, our surgeon advisors, and one of the surgeons kind of looked like this. He said, well, not just yet. Okay? And immediately, without hesitation, I said, okay, guys, we're on to 14. And we made the changes that we felt that we had to do, and that's what we are now implanting in humans. We're going to be implanting that model because we solved what we thought are all the necessary problems. How do you know you got all the problems? We don't know if we have all the problems. Oh, the new layer of unknowns comes with you do the humans. You know, people say, well, do you know if this is going to happen? You know if this? No. An entrepreneur does not have all the answer. He or she is seeking those answers, and we will seek those when we're doing our humans. Now, what we can say to the doctor is, this is the angiograms with our device in the animal. This is the long-term studies in the animals. And then the final risk is from two people. Finally, it's from the doctor who says, I, as surgeon of this institution, am willing to take that risk. And Charlie, what do you think? Think we should go for it? And Charlie says, of course, let's go for it. All right, those are the two final risk takers. Okay? And then we hope to find the answers. Okay? And hopefully those are good answers. If they're not, back to the drawing boards or go home.
I love it. And I have to ask you, you know, going and sort of pioneering in the space with an artificial glass with Medical 21, your entire career sounds like looking at the hardest, most complex problems and seeing the roads that people have gone down, the risks they take, and say, okay, we're going to go down a completely different road that we don't know what's down that road, but the risks there are worth taking because the payoff is going to be somewhere down there versus going down the same road. Do you feel like that's the same thing with Medical 21 and this artificial graft?
No, we are, you know, if I studied everything that has been tried before, and we study the basics, okay? If I put 10 engineers and we say, we're going to make a graft, the first thing that everybody's going to say, well, number one, we got to have biocompatible material. Okay, fine. And let's face it, there are lots of materials that are biocompatible. We've put a lot of things in the human body, all right, you know, pacemakers and valves and stuff like that with different materials and stuff like that. So that's, but the next thing everybody seems to say, we want to have a very strong graft. It's got to handle high pressures of the heart, and it's got to handle the 40 million times a year pounding. So everybody goes in those two things. And then there's other things that, you know, compliant and, you know, and ease of suturing and a variety of different things, okay? But the two biggest one was biocompatibility and strength. And And when you study that, everybody has failed. So why am I going to go down the same thing? Okay? All right? So instead of making our graft strong like everybody else, we went the opposite direction. Remember I told you, I don't go the same because everybody failed at. Why am I going to go to that route? I'm going to go this route. In fact, we were going to name the company Medical 180. You know what 180 means? Mm-hmm. Okay? It means you're going the opposite direction. But there wasn't enough people that knew what 180 was, so we just named it Medical 21, talking about that the materials that we're using now are 21st century materials, not the materials that have been tried in the past, which was in the 20th century. So that's how, simple explanation, okay? So we try different things. We go down different materials. We're looking for different answers. You're doing what everybody else does, okay, including our regulators, unfortunately. They look at the past. Well, what about this and what about that? Yeah, that was a problem back there. We're going in a different direction, okay? You got to live with what we're trying to do. And we try to prove it as much as we possibly can in the animal, which has been the standard. Okay, if there was another way of being able to prove it, we would be using a different method. But we used the sheep model, okay? We started out with pigs, but pigs grow too big. You can't throw a 1,000-pound pig on the table, so we stick with sheep. And that works fine, okay? And we've been doing that. And when we show that we have angiograms longer than anything that's ever been done before in an animal, wow, let's go.
Ooh, I want to wrap up specifically just talking about Medical 21, the amount you guys have raised, what you're looking to do and everything. Is that okay?
Sure.
Perfect. So with Medical 21, you're going after a massive market, right?
Yes.
Right? Because with grafts, as you mentioned before, not everybody needs a pacemaker, not everybody needs a valve, but especially given the fact that, let's face it, in the 21st century, if we're going to talk about the 21st century, in honor of Medical 21, people are living longer than ever before, right? And part of that, you have an explosion of longevity medicine, people living well into their 90s, 100s, etc., right? And the human body is not used to that. And so, of course, as we get older, even if you have no like comorbidities, you don't have a family history and everything, you're going to need things as you get older. And so a graft is going to be something that a lot of people are going to need. Right. Something that might be as normal as, as you get older, maybe, a lot of people, they just take aspirin, right? Yeah. So knowing that, right, what were the first steps when you came to creating the artificial graft with Medical 21? What makes the graft different than what we've seen before?
People, as I said before, were trying to make grafts very strong and this and that, because if you're just thinking, well, it's got to be strong. Right. We went the opposite direction. We make our graft very weak.
And you said, so weak, you make it weak.
Weak, W-E-A-K, okay? Very weak, okay? By making the walls extremely thin. But when they make the walls extremely thin, the graft all of a sudden becomes permeable or porous, okay? That allows nutrients from the outside to go in. In your veins of your legs or in any vessel of your body, the walls of that vessel is thin because nutrients have to go in. That's called vasovasorum, to use a very technical word. It took me years to learn how to spell it, okay? And that's what we want. We want that nutrients should come from the outside, so we make it very weak. Of course, some guy comes along and said, Manny, hell of a great idea, except for one basic problem. As soon as you sew it onto the heart, it'll blow up in your face, because it can't handle the pressure that the heart creates. That's why everybody makes them strong, and you're coming along and making them very weak. And
like an artery, right?
Yeah.
You're making it more like a vein.
Yeah, no, making it even less than a vein.
Even less than a vein, yeah, which is...
going to blow up in your face.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Exactly. But we had a technology called nitinol. It's a wire. We had that technology, and what we do is we use the wire technology, the nitinol technology, to make a scaffold, make it in the form of a tube, okay? And then we put in polymers that now make that into a graft. But the polymers, the way we do it, help force the creation, a regeneration of tissue within the graft. We call that angiogenesis, okay? And so that after the graft is implanted, the your own tissue, your own endothelial cells begin to grow within the graft, and the polymers are absorbed by the body, so that at the end of maybe a year and a half, 2 years, the graft is gone.
It's dissolved. It's
It's
become
all
part
gone,
of the body.
except for the nitinol wire. That stays.
Right.
But now you're left with a vessel that is stronger than any vessel in your body.
Because it has those nitinol reinforcement, and the
you go.
majority of it essentially is you have that angiogenesis that happens with the cells.
Yeah.
And so, how long, over what period of time does it take for that to happen? You said about a year?
Year and a half, about a year to 2 years.
So
Okay.
at that point, the problem with previous, like not just valves but grafts and everything, is that you have always this issue of rejection by the body,
It's
right?
gone.
You remove that issue.
Yeah.
And it sounds like based on the pressure issues, because the body essentially grows into it and becomes angiogenic, the body has a sort of a magical way of figuring out this is the sort of strength that that vessel needs based on the pressures, etc. So you kind of solve.
So we make it like into an artery.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Your strongest vessels are the arteries, so we make an artery.
Would you say, what's fascinating about that? Would you
It's
say
fascinating. Huh?
It is
see?
fascinating.
Pulling out the best of you. Okay.
It sounds that rather than saying we're going to find every way to engineer this, et cetera, the best engineer of all time is the human body. So you're essentially providing the scaffold, the bridge for the human body to use and use its own materials, its own intuitive engineering to develop the best graft of all time.
There you go.
Not bad.
Not bad.
Not bad at all.
Not bad. That's what we're doing.
How much have you all raised to date so far?
Well, for the company from the beginning, we're in a neighborhood of about 17 to 20 million that we have raised. Okay, and over a 7-year period of time, we're very, very cheap. We don't spend money. Okay, now that we're preparing for a clinical trial in Switzerland, we're raising $10 million right now. Okay, we do private individuals, families, private placement, plain vanilla stock, no prefers, no nothing, just like I've done all my other companies. We're doing nothing different, as I said at the beginning. We're doing the exact same way as we did St. Jude, okay? And I don't know why I say St. Jude, it could be CPI as well. Because CPI was even a greater success than St. Jude, and that's hard to imagine.
Why, in doing this raise,
Yeah.
especially given your track record, your history, you can raise through a variety of different avenues. Why is it that you're specifically focusing just on like family offices, private investors, and no preferred stock and everything? Just educate our audience a little
Okay,
bit,
all right.
because not everybody knows why.
Okay, I think the way I do this is simple. Everybody knows if they have some extra money, they go down to their broker and they say, I want to buy 100 shares in General Motors, Tesla, U.S. Steel, whatever you want, okay? All right, and they hope that the performance of the company will cause that stock, the value of that stock, to go up. That's a normal publicly held thing. And they want to have the ability that, I think it's not going to go up any further, so I'm going to sell. Or, gee, I just found out that my wife is pregnant and I need the money for the baby. Okay, so we pull it out. All right. Now, we try to run our company like a public company, but we can't. We're still private. All right. So we sell plain, common stock. Right now, we're selling shares at $5 a share. And by the way, on this film, this is not a solicitation, okay? So I don't get any trouble. It's just trying to explain how we try to run our company. We run it as close to a public company as possible. You buy shares, common stock, like everybody else, okay? Now, how do you raise the value? Well, what happens is that as we have special events, and if there's a very key event that's really big, I want to raise the value of that stock. Well, the only way I can do that is I split the stock. So now Charlie, who put in $50,000 and he got 10,000 shares at $5, now I said, Charlie, you get twice as many shares, okay? All right, now you got, 20,000 shares, okay? But still $5, okay? And we keep the $5 as long as we can, until our next event. Like, for example, one of the events that happened to our company was when the Mayo Clinic, which is recognized as probably the #1 hospital of the world, with the top of surgeons, et cetera, and they approached us. I didn't approach them. They approached us and said, we want to be involved with this. This is too important. And I said, yeah, sure, you want to be involved? Yeah, of course. I wouldn't say no to you. What do you want to do? Well, how about if we send some surgeons over to your lab and help you in your lab? Oh, okay. So the then current chief of cardiac surgery, Professor Dr. Crescenello, okay, Juan Crescenello, came to our labs and tried to participate in our animal trials, okay? And then, by the way, do you need any money? Oh, I said, does a bear live in the woods? Of course I need some money. So they put some money into it. And then finally, we want to do the clinical trial. Well, yeah, you sure you want to? Yeah, we'll sign the paper. And they actually signed a contract with us that they will do the clinical trial for us here in the United States. What else would I want? Right? Okay? Now that's a big event. So what I did is I split the stock to, again, allow our earlier shareholders to benefit growth. Okay? And that's how we do that.
That's what I love about that. Again, for a lot of the audience who's new to the world of investing and venture and everything, what's nice about that is that a lot of times when you're raising money, the earlier investors end up getting diluted into oblivion.
Right. We don't do that.
And you doing the opposite, which is you're taking care of those early because those people put up their hard-earned money
right.
early on before there was any traction, before even they knew it was going to work.
You got it.
And so you reward those people.
Yep.
Fantastic. In raising this $10 million, you're going to do that clinical trial in Switzerland. What I love about my show is that sometimes people make predictions on the show that come true. So let's imagine all things go the way that you see that they're going to go. You raise the $10 million. What happens in Switzerland? And if you can give us sort of an outlook for the next 5 or 10 years with Medical 21. And when it comes true, I'll clip this out and say, hey, Manny said it on my show in 2024.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, we are trying to raise $10 million to help finance the trial. Because in the trial, you have additional expenses coming up, the cost of following some of these patients, the cost of the hospitals, cost of travel, I can't find a subway that goes from Minneapolis to Switzerland, so I have to take a plane and all that sort of stuff. And so we have extra expenses, so it becomes costly, gathering the data, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why you need that extra money, all right? The study that we're hoping to be able to do calls for 118 patients. Now, I don't put down 118 patients because everybody's going to ask me, where did you come up with that number?
I was just going to ask.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So instead we say 125 patients. Okay. Plus or minus a few. Okay. And then the last time we did a study like that, it took us 9 months. Because times are what they are today, we're saying that in about a couple of years we should be able to get a CE mark. Now, the CE mark allows us to virtually go to every country in Europe, and there's a lot of countries outside of Europe that will accept the CE mark as good enough, okay? Now, the market is so big that one day I said to our guys, when can we build 1,000 of these grafts per day? And they kind of, what are you talking about, Villafaña? I said, guys, don't get excited, but 1,000 grafts per day is only 10% of the market. That is nothing in my standards. My standard is always 20% or we don't do it, okay? But anyway, I looked at it in a different way. I said, if we took Europe, when we got the CE mark and we took Europe, and we have no other implants, nothing in fact, just Western Europe, so nothing in Russia, nothing in Lithuania or any of these other countries, Romania, nothing in Canada, nothing in the US, nothing anywhere else except Western Europe. And we got 8 to 10% of the Western European market. You're talking about $400 million in sales. Do you want to do all the valuations of what that would mean in value of a company? It's multi-billion dollars. Not bad for just getting the CE mark.
And before you even come to the US market.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's how big this is. And then, only recently, the guys said, Manny, we have other platforms with this device. We can use it in peripheral, renal,
Right.
pediatric, a variety of different things. The numbers I talk about is only
The cardiac. Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
So the numbers are staggering. So I don't care about where we get approvals. Just let me just get started. Because no matter where we start, it's big numbers.
Absolutely, and especially as we mentioned before, that people are living longer. As you live longer, the body was never designed to last that long.
Yeah.
And so certain things like I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like things like varicose veins, instead of collapsing the vein, maybe you just replace it.
Yeah.
Right. So, in wrapping up, and again, Manny, I want to thank you for spending some time with us and sharing all these stories. I'm very excited for Medical 21. We'll be following along. And what's the website for Medical 21?
Medical21.com.
Easy enough. So I'll make sure our listeners go check that out. In wrapping up, I want to kind of wrap up. Being at LSI, what I love about this conference, Scott Patel and his team do such a wonderful job because they bring the best of our industry together, from the investor side, the innovators, etc. Right? When you look at the current MedTech entrepreneur today, I'm sure there's many things that you are happy about, other things where you're like, you guys could be doing better in these areas. What's something that you see today with your average MedTech entrepreneur that you wish you could give them advice on?
That's a good question. I see a lot of the entrepreneurs here truly dedicated to what they want to do, okay? And that's good. If you don't believe in what you're doing, go home, okay? Simple as that. And they are very, very dedicated to what they're doing. I think one of the things that keeps hitting me right in the forehead is the cost, time of the regulatory avenues that you have to take these days. And so you have to take that into consideration. The simplest of products can cost you a lot of money. I remember one of our advisors said, you don't realize, Manny, that today a brand new drug-eluting stent, which we have hundreds of them, but if somebody comes up with another one, all right, it's going to cost about $500 million to $1 billion just to carry that all the way through the FDA regulation. That's a staggering amount of money, okay? We are trying, for example, through some of the work that Chade is doing, and my wife is helping out as well, of going to the VA and other avenues where you can do some studies that maybe not circumvent the FDA. That's not what we're trying to do, but can get started earlier through some of the things like that. So that's one thing. You have to learn to consider that there is a lot of potentially non-dilutive money available through the NIH, through the VA, and through things like that. And we are doing the paperwork, although the truth of the matter is that maybe there's a 30-40% chance that you will succeed, but you got to take a risk. I mean, if you think about anything that we're doing, we're working with far less than 30% success rates, okay? I don't know what else I could tell you. I think I see everybody trying. They come to these meetings to learn how they're going to finance. Now this meeting, this LSI meeting, was initially started by Scott because he saw a lot of young entrepreneurs going through the standard VC venture capital route and ending up with very little, if anything, of their former company, of their company. And it says it's got to be a better way. And of course, that's true. There's got to be a better way. And just the mere fact that they're here, they're trying to find out how to do this. They come to me, they come to everybody, they share ideas. How do we do that? How can we get to, well, have you talked to this family or that group or stuff like that? Because venture capital is a way, but for many entrepreneurs, it's a very costly way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Manny, I just want to thank you so much for coming on
Pleasure.
the show. I'm excited to follow what you and Medical 21 do. And in the meantime, we'll be seeing you more in the meeting then.
Okay, Omar, a real pleasure. Thank you
so much. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much.